Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Inside Lowell Daily Pulse, the Tuesday, July 8th edition of the Daily Pulse, the show that keeps its finger on the pulse of Lowell and the world around it. And today we're going to step a little bit outside of Lowell and into the world around it, but not too far, because we're just going to go across the town line and head into the town of Chelmsford, my town right now, my current town. And we're excited to be joined here in the WellPoint studios for the first time by Chelmsford Town Manager Paul Cohen. Good morning, Mr. Manager. How are you, sir?
Doing very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. We're probably long overdue. I've been doing this for almost 3 years, and I don't think we've had you in here to talk about Chelmsford, though we've talked about the town an awful lot. But I figured this would be a nice opportunity for us to kind of, catch up, give a state of the city, so on and so forth, to talk about some of the challenges that you face as a town manager in a community like Chelmsford, as opposed to beating up on the Lowell city manager all the time. Your good friend Tom Golden. But you had another wildly successful 4th of July parade. That event is amazing to me. I actually went last year for the first time. I remember all these years, driving by and seeing the chairs set up days, if not a week in advance. And actually, when we got there with the kids last year, I couldn't believe how big of a parade it was, how many different participants there were. That's it's an amazing undertaking, but I'm sure it must be a difficult one to put on, or at least create a lot of logistical challenges for the town, right?
Yeah, we're fortunate that we have a long-standing parade committee of volunteers who basically work 10 months to put the parade together. It's, as you noted, it's a 2-hour parade. And that includes getting bands from Canada, from other parts of the New England area, floats, antique cars, Colonial Minutemen and so forth. So it's a fantastic event. This year was probably the nicest weather we've had for a parade.
Really?
It was no threat of rain. It was low humidity. It was 80 degrees, and the turnout was phenomenal. It was a great parade, and right now we're gearing up because next year is obviously the nation's 250th. Sure. So we're already making commitments to get people next year. Next year, the 4th is on a Saturday. So, it'll be a very popular weekend. So, right now our focus is quickly pivoting to the nation's 250th and obviously trying to do a patriotic theme. But it's a great effort. Everyone's all in, whether it's the volunteers, the public safety officials, everybody. And it's also going to be an election year too. So you'll get all the politicians.
You'll have a dozen extra politicians and their challenges.
Exactly. Yeah. So it should be one heck of a parade next year. And again, our biggest concern is the weather. We can control everything else but the weather. And this year was perfect. And even the night before, on the 3rd, we had the country fair on the town common. That was an overcast night, but the rain never came. Again, that went from 5 to almost 9 o'clock. There was a country band performing for 2 hours. The Chelmsford Community Band performed, all the exhibits and booths. I mean, it was a great event, and we're really proud of it. That's sort of Chelmsford's signature event.
Sure is. I kind of likened it to some folks who I was trying to describe it to as kind of Chelmsford's version of the folk festival. It's not a 3-day thing, but literally it brings people. It's not just Chelmsford residents.
No.
That thing. I know a ton of folks who were there. I was at the Cape, unfortunately, and couldn't attend, but people were sending me photos of the various floats and stuff, and it just it's a fun time. It really, really is, and it's something that you and everybody who's responsible for putting it on should be incredibly proud of. We're sitting here in the WellPoint studios. I'm your host, Teddy Panos. Chelmsford Town Manager Paul Cohen is with us. We're going to talk about the town and the issues affecting it in a couple of minutes here. Let me just quickly thank our Daily Pulse sponsors. We start, of course, with Ray Booten. He is a licensed realtor in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. He's also a certified appraiser in both of those states as well. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home, a business, or a commercial property, or if you want that property appraised, Ray Booten is the one you need to talk to. And you can find him easily enough online at realestaterayBooten.com, realestaterayBooten.com. As you can tell, he and I love alliteration, so we created that website. Thank you as well to our friends at WellPoint. WellPoint is the only health plan offering healthcare benefits exclusively to GIC members at WellPoint. Your whole health is their whole point. And we thank WellPoint for inviting us here to the WellPoint Studios. We thank Ray, some other sponsors that we'll thank, but let's get right to it. Let's start with kind of a state of the city address, as if we may. How do you kind of see the town of Chelmsford on July 8th, 2025?
I think we're as well positioned for what may be coming at us. What people don't realize is Proposition 2.5 works well in a period of low inflation. And it works well if the state's supporting you, right? The idea of 2.5 means your tax levy can go up to 2.5%, allowable without a voter increase, plus whatever growth you have in the community. And the challenge we've had in recent years has been the inflationary impacts. Right now where inflation was, as you know, was running heavy, but right now inflation's still running over 3%.
Sure.
So the biggest thing we provide as a community is labor, right? We educate students. We provide police officers, firefighters, public works officials. Our biggest expense of our $170 million budget is personnel. And we also then provide benefits to those people like health insurance. Well, the big challenge is in a period of high inflation is, we had health insurance, double-digit increase in health insurance premiums. We contribute 75% for active employees. In fact, the increase this year was 18% for premiums. And we're actually the second largest employer in the town, aside from UPS, believe it or not, in terms of number of employees. So that's been a real challenge, because if your revenue base isn't growing with your personnel expense base, and overall expenses, what it costs for electricity, what it costs for road materials, any petroleum products and so forth. That's the challenge that Chelmsford has, Lowell has, everyone has. And so that's been our big challenge. And now we're staring at, coming to your question, is what are the impacts of the big, beautiful bill in terms of funding to the state, which would then trickle down, or funding directly to the town in terms of educational services for special education and other costs, which also are running above than inflation. That's the big unknown. And that's why you saw the governor sort of announce when she signed the bill on the 4th of July. Everyone was wondering why she signed on the 4th of July. We figured that out. She was going on vacation, but that was okay. But the real challenge is she basically said she's not going to release any local aid earmarks. And also she wants the ability to cut the state budget, including potentially local aid, based upon what may be coming towards us. And obviously the president's bill was signed into law on July 4th as well. But as we sit here today, nobody knows what the implications of that are. Also, the federal fiscal year starts October 1st. What are going to be we saw the struggles and the whole appropriation mess and everything and the back and forth in terms of funding for this year. But what's it going to mean when it's a new fiscal year and this Congress and the president puts a budget going forward? What's it going to mean in terms of funding support for the state and for communities? That's the big unknown. That's the big challenge, not just for Chelmsford, but for everybody. Actually, in Chelmsford case, we're not as bad off, because 76% of our budget is funded from the local property tax. So we only get about 13% of our budget from the state aid. And so whereas the city of Lowell, is like 50-50, and then a place like Lawrence is much higher than that. So we're less vulnerable, but on the other hand, you have the same pressures. So that's the big unknown, is what are the impacts? Because even if you, like you said, you've got potentially reduction in funding, but you still have inflationary increases. Sure. And so you got that double hit of you're trying to maintain services, but on the other hand, you can't, because if you're getting less money, but your cost of services is going up, it's a double hit.
So and that's our big 76% of your budget, the funding for your budget,
comes from the
property tax base.
Exactly.
13%, you said is state aid / Fed. And then what the other 10-11% is what? Meals tax,
meals tax, motor vehicle excise tax, rooms tax. The other thing we found out is, interesting, again, forgive me for drifting off, we had heard the governor announce that she was closing all the hotel shelters, right? Well, then we inquired with CTI, because we're sheltering homeless individuals in Chelmsford, and they're like, no, we're not going anywhere. I said, what do you mean? Oh, that's just family shelters that are closing, not individual ones. So for those people who thought that the shelter at the former Best Western site on Chelmsford Street, near Stedman Street, was closing, it's not closing anytime soon. And so again, it's those sort of nuances. In other words, you got to ask the questions carefully and listen carefully. But that's our big concern is we're struggling as it was with inflation. And honestly, the state hasn't been a good partner I mean, again, I've been in this business since 1990 as a professional manager. Obviously, I've lived in Massachusetts in the Lowell area my entire life. The support that we had going back to Mike Dukakis when Proposition 2.5 was implemented, there was the whole idea of revenue sharing and partnership. Well, this year, the legislature just passed the budget. We're getting 1.1% in unrestricted general government aid. Used to be called lottery aid. 1.1%. Well, that ain't going to keep pace with inflation. Sure. And then on the education aid, the Chapter 70, we got $150 per student. And I did the math. That came out to like 2.6%. So I was like, well, wait a minute. How is this going to work when the school budget we just passed went up by 4%? And part of the reason the school budget went up was special education costs, transportation costs, and they just signed contracts with the educators unions and so forth, and we're giving them a 3% cost of living increase. So the bottom line is the math doesn't work. And yet when the towns ask for either municipal reform and or more local aid, we're sort of held off. And I think that's the frustrating part is for local officials. And again, I'm sure you're going to hear this from Manager 𝐏𝐚𝐮𝐥. You're going to hear it from my other colleagues. That's the big challenges. And the reason in Chelmsford is Chelmsford's a middle-class community. We haven't passed an operational 2.5 override in terms of the operating budget since 1991. And that was for a trash collection. But we have had some recent ones like debt exclusions for particular capital projects like the fire stations project. So that's the big concern. So we don't know the magnitude of what we're facing, but that's going to be the story as we go into the fall, and then obviously in the fall, we'll start budget planning for the upcoming fiscal year. It starts, July 1, 2026. So that's going to be the big thing. It's always about the money, quite frankly, but the reason it's about the money is it's because the money is the services.
Sure. And so a couple of things I want to touch on some of those numbers, and you may have answered one of my questions just there. But so you said labor is your biggest driver. I'm told that that's generally in any community 75 to 80% of a budget, a town or city budget, a school budget, et cetera. It's labor. It takes people. It takes employees to deliver the services. Right. So that's understandable. Is that kind of where you guys are?
Yeah, that's accurate because that's what we do.
Once you roll benefits, retirements, et cetera.
Yeah, when you roll all that in, that's what it is. Because again, we're not manufacturing anything. We don't have, we don't have raw ingredients and so forth. It's services. Right. Police officers, firefighters, school teachers, DPW workers, town hall staff. That's really the name of the game. It's a service government. And you contribute, you said 75% towards your employees. Towards active employees. We do 63% for retirees. We have 1,000 retirees, and we have about 700 active employees that are taking health insurance. Is that number industry standard? Is that norm? If we looked around at a Westford, a Drake, at a Tingsboro, et cetera? It is, and it's growing over time. People are living longer, and so therefore you're carrying them longer into retirement, and the health insurance is a big driver on that. All right. So with all of these dynamics, because you either have to cut services significantly to cut that payroll, which is your main driver of your costs, or you have to find new sources of revenue. And as you said, that's tight now. There's economic concerns. Hopefully we don't go into a recession, but I've had people tell me that that's a potential in 2025. And, I think we've warded it off so far, but the year is still and this issue of and tariffs and who knows what may happen. But you're right. That would be the double whammy. It goes back to the late 70s. If you had a recession and inflation, that would be like devastating. It is. So my question then, and I think you answered it with a no, is the current model of funding and the way the state funds communities like yours, is that sustainable? How much longer can this go on? You mentioned you passed an override, an operational budget override in 91. You've done a few with the fire station, I think was in last year's ballot, et cetera. But can you keep going at this rate before you have to do a significant cut in some services in some way, shape, or form? I think the answer is no. It's not sustainable. We actually eliminated a half dozen positions in the current year's budget that started because of the pressures. I had to, in February, I had to let 3 people go, active employees go, release them from the community, and then we saw what was coming. So we actually didn't fill positions. Like we eliminated the DPW position, we didn't fill it. We had an assistant health director, we didn't fill it. We eliminated those positions. Our community business director, we eliminated that position, and our community services coordinator had to lay off that person. So it's already happening, but it's going to get worse. And I think the reality is as they said, 2.5 isn't indexed for inflation. And so, and if you talk about, trying to modify Proposition 2.5, saying, well, why don't you index it to 2.5% or inflation, whichever is greater? Because you remember when we come out of the pandemic, we were running inflation at 6%, and we were at 2.5%. And then the federal government sent the American Rescue Plan Act money. So that sort of was a temporary thing, but we didn't put positions in that because we knew it was temporary funding. No, it isn't sustainable. And I think the state's going to have to look at this going forward. Whether there's a change in either Proposition 2.5, or you go to a model like you see in other parts of the country where maybe local government's also partially funded by the income tax. There's either the state income tax, because see, this the funny part is I saw even this morning somebody's complaining about, oh, my taxes are going up again. It's like, well, yeah, because if you want us to continue to provide our employees with a cost of living allowance and benefits and so forth, why wouldn't it go up? But yet when they see that their payroll tax doesn't go up or their state income tax doesn't go up, but if your income goes up, you're paying more in taxes. That's the disconnect and so when property tax is a fixed amount, it's quarterly, you see it, whether it's in your escrow or you see it if you're not paying through escrow. I don't see how it works. And again, the state hasn't allowed local option taxes, as we call it. For example, there was a discussion this time was why not allow local communities to increase their 0.75% meals tax to 1% or something more. That was killed by the legislature. Same thing with, there was talk years ago about why not do a local gasoline tax because, of 2 cents per gallon, whatever. Or what, and the bottom line is the legislature doesn't allow that local control to communities in Massachusetts. And so that's the challenge. So I don't see how it's going to work. And I think what you're going to see, and you're already hearing it, particularly out in the rural areas and the suburban communities, because you have the mandates on the other side. You have the educational funding requirements like you see in Drake, where they're like, yeah, you gave us extra state aid, but we have to pay more than that to educate the kids. Plus, it's also a different education system. There are more students today receiving individual education plans, special education plans. No one wants to deny those, but those are entitlements by law. So now the question is, you've got to fund the entitlements. What's left? And that's the challenge. And I think you're just going to see that eroding, quite frankly. And then it comes down to the services, because the biggest complaint we get as manager in a community is the roads. People complain about the potholes. Yeah,
but people in Lowell think that's only a Lowell problem.
No,
I have one that develops right outside my house as I'm turning left into my driveway every year. Weather causes this, right?
And the biggest source of local funding for the for road construction is the motor vehicle excise tax, the gasoline when you go to your gas station. That level, the state has level funded communities for essentially for 13 years in that funding level. Well, we know the cost of road construction has gone, it's about half of what it was 13 years ago. So that's why the road. So every year when we have cash, we finish in the black like we will. This we did, last week. We'll put more money towards the roads, but we're not even funding half of what should be done annually into the roads. And I know the city's doing the same thing. They're putting more money into the streets, but I'm sure Manager 𝐏𝐚𝐮 and the council will tell you it's not enough.
You're paving 8 to 10 miles of road a year.
When you should be doing 20.
Right. You've got hundreds, if not more.
And the reason is the roads deteriorate. And then the other thing that frustrates people is, well, why are you paving Drum Hill Road? Why are you paving, Littleton Road? Well, those are the heavier travel roads and higher speed roads. So you're going to do those before you do a cul-de-sac at the end of it. But people get aggravated because they'll see what's in front of them. And if they live on that cul-de-sac, they're like, my road's horrible. But it's like, well, wait a minute. We've got to deal with the ability to transport people through the community, whether it's on school buses or commercial and so forth. That's why the main roads get more attention than the side roads.
You mentioned ARPA funding. How much did Chelmsford get? And what did you use it on? You said you didn't create any new positions. What did you use your ARPA
we got $12 million, and we put most of it actually into air quality, believe it or not, because remember at the time we came out of a pandemic and the whole idea of air exchange. So we put most of it into our antiquated air exchange systems at the high schools, the school systems, and so forth. That's where most of the money went. And right now, our systems are running, and I think the schools in such a healthier than they've ever been, because again, people don't know about Chelmsford. Our newest school, the high school, is over 50 years old, and our other 6 schools that are in use are between 50 and 70 years old. And so we really put the infrastructure into the air quality of those facilities, making sure, to meet today's standards of air exchange. And so our schools have been healthier, but that's where most of the money went. And so that's where it's been at.
I did not realize your schools are that old.
Yeah.
The high school is over 50 years old.
That's the new high school, as people call it. That's our newest school. That opened in 74.
Although, so actually, I shouldn't be surprised by that, because I remember playing basketball games as an 8th, 9th grader at the McCarthy School.
Yep. And the McCarthy School was built
in the 70s and early 80s.
The McCarthy School was built in 59.
Yeah.
So between 59 and 74, all the town's current schools were built, because that's when the town's population, really increased with 495 and Route 3. So you've got your 4 elementary schools, your 2 middle schools, and your high school, all between 50 and 75 years old. And that now we're actually doing a feasibility study to build a new middle school to replace the Parker Middle School. We're working with the MSBA, which will fund half the cost. And that's right now, the Parker Middle School is a grade 5-6 middle school. So we're looking to see whether to replace it, because the state makes you look at all options, including renovation, expansion, so forth. But the big question is going to be grade configuration. And the current thought is, if we could expand the new Parker School to a 4-5-6 middle school, that would pull the 4th grade out of the 4 elementary schools, creating more space. Because even though there's only 400 kids in a grade level now, whereas years ago there was 600, 700, going back to the educational needs and the individual attention, they're at space premiums, which is why we have modular classrooms and so forth. So the thought is, build a 4-6 middle school, free up the space for the 4 elementary schools. That carries you forward, but you're probably talking a project that's over $250 million in cost, and the state, even if the state funds half, you're still funding. 125 plus million.
And if experience teaches us anything, whatever the number they tell you it's going to cost, when you start,
as Lowell knows,
it's going to go up. And and Lowell knows it's because of unique challenges, but it's happening elsewhere too. There are other communities where things are going completely over budget. I'm nervous about that Rourke Bridge, which has gone from 60 to 100 million a couple of years ago to 273, and I'm taking the over. If I were DraftKings puts a line on that, I'm taking 300 and above.
And also, we have no assurance that the town's even going to be able to support it. And part of the reason for that is Chelmsford's an older community. We have more residents that are 60 and above than under 60. In other words, that's the biggest demographic of our community, is 60 and above.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We only have we have less than 30% of the families have kids in the schools. When you think about today's world, there's usually 2 kids in a family, but we're an older community. And quite frankly, we've cared for our facilities. So it's not as though the current Parker School or other schools are in disrepair and falling apart. There's going to be this hesitancy to say, gee, do we have to do it now? And gosh knows, the vote won't happen until 2 years from now, in 2027. Who knows what the economy will be like then? Who knows what the costs will be like then? And then who knows if they'll support it? But you've got to try, and you've got to advance the effort. So that's what we're doing.
All right. We're chatting with Chelmsford Town Manager Paul Cohen. He's joining us here on the Daily Pulse on this Tuesday, July 8th. We'll continue our discussion and kind of look ahead at the impacts of the 2 bills signed on July 4th, interestingly enough, one in Washington, D.C., one on Beacon Hill. First, let me thank our Daily Pulse sponsors, Ray Booten, licensed realtor in Mass and New Hampshire. You can find him online, realestaterayBooten.com. Thank you as well to our friends at WellPoint. At WellPoint, your whole health is their whole point. Washington Savings Bank, banking that feels like home. Make the switch now to Washington Savings Bank. TMI Properties, quality and value at every price point. Find your perfect space with TMI. Mahoney Oil, providing warmth and protection to Greater Lowell and Southern New Hampshire since 1925. The Greater Lowell Community Foundation, improving the quality of life in our communities through strategic, impactful philanthropy. Francis E. Preventure Insurance, the agency Greater Lowell has counted on to protect its most valuable assets since 1982. And by the Massachusetts Pirates, they bring all the hard-hitting action and excitement of arena football to the Mill City. Final home game, regular season home game of the year is Friday night, July 25th at the Songa Center. Some great ticket offers available on the Massachusetts Pirates website. Check it on out. Pirates, of course, they've I saw them at the parade.
They were in the parade.
Year.
They were there
my
this
son
year.
got a football, and they were there this year as well. So it's cool that they're a big part of our communities. So all these challenges you talked about, and you kind of folks say, well, you know, Chelmsford's an affluent community. It's not like a Dracut or a Tingsboro or a Dunstable, et cetera. They can afford these taxes because they're all wealthy people and, you know, living in, you know, big sales price homes and whatnot. Is that accurate?
I would say it's not as wealthy as Westford or Carlisle and so forth. It's a middle class, upper middle class community, but they're very frugal, right?
Well,
that's the thing. You talk about
60 people, 60 years old and above, usually fixed income,
right? Exactly. So so they have property wealth certainly, but property wealth doesn't always translate in terms of cash wealth. So no, it's not an impoverished community. It's not an entitlement community. It's sort of that middle class, you know, that what we call the forgotten middle class.
Sure.
You're not poor enough that you get all the state aid, and you're not wealthy enough that the voters will just fund whatever you ask them to do.
But no matter what the income level is, when people see that tax bill come, the property tax bill every quarter, and if it goes up, they're not happy. They don't want to pay.
And the tax bill is approaching $9,000 for the average single-family home. So again, you divide that over a quarter, and they're paying over $2,000 every 3 months.
What's the median income in Chelmsford?
Median income is about $100,000 or so.
Family or individual?
Individual.
Individual.
Yeah, individual.
Okay.
Yeah. It's higher than obviously Lowell and other communities, and so I think your median family income is like 160, 170. So there's income there. It's not a poor community, but again they're facing those same struggles in terms of cost of living, and I think that's the big challenge. And then our biggest challenge is trying to reach people. Our hardest thing is, one is getting the message out. What is the median to reach people, and two is, are people who want to pay attention? In other words, it's two sides. I mean, it's two sides to the coin. Is people are so busy with their own life, is they kind of just want to make sure that I don't want to be. I've got to focus on my children, my job, my career. I don't want to have to worry about policemen showing up to my house or trash getting collected and so forth. So that's the other challenge: is the world is different in 2025 than it was in 1985 or 2005 or even 2015 for that matter. And so those are the big challenges. Is one is reaching people, but also getting them to pay attention. Which is why when you see the turnout at local elections, it's not the 70+% you get at the last November at the presidential election. It's more like the 7%.
Yeah, you're getting single digits. I try to tell people in Lowell who are complaining about the turnout, I mean, you guys are getting, anywhere from 15 to 18 or so generally.
Which is pretty good.
It was down last time. But there are cities and towns that would kill to have that number. I'm glad you mentioned the hotels earlier, because there's this you hear it an awful lot here in Lowell. I hear it constantly. The surrounding communities aren't doing their part with the homeless situation. Their police forces are rounding up their homeless individuals, their panhandlers, their societal ills, and they're bringing them to the transitional living center in Lowell, and they're just dropping them off there, and they're not doing their fair share. You mentioned that former Best Western Hotel. They've covered up the sign, but long before people paid attention to the Migrant Hotel family shelter, that hotel was serving as was it a family or an individual?
Individual.
Shelter?
It's always been an individual shelter, and I think we're probably on our 8th or 9th year right now. And not only that, but we also have the encampments. People think all the encampments are just in Lowell. No, we've got the encampments up in Drum Hill behind Walmart and so forth. And so we do have homeless people, and no, we don't drive them to the Lowell border or push them out. In fact, that's not the reality. The reality is Chelmsford is doing its share. I mean, like I said, CTI is operating in Chelmsford, and that shelter is fully occupied, and it has been for years. So there's nothing but support for the community. But I'll tell you, it is our biggest calls for police and fire are there. Just the nature of the operation. But people also forget that, that we're housing division of families and children is up in Chelmsford now off of 129. We have the immigration court in Chelmsford. So this idea that the suburbs, or in this case Chelmsford, isn't doing its fair share, I think is a bit misguided.
And the governor was kicking the tires on the former Radisson hotel
Yep.
as a potential family shelter as well. Right?
And that's now under renovation. They're going to open it as one of the Hilton brands probably in the next few months. So I think by fall you'll see a not the facility, meaning the banquet facilities or the occupied gathering area for events, but the actual hotel portion, which would be to the left, is going to be branded under I think it's Homes to You, one of the Hilton brands, and you already have the Holiday Inn Express at the other end, and then in the middle they're actually converting it to a day care facility for adult daycare. And that's going to be the lower level, and there's some talk about putting housing above that middle portion we call the banquet facility. But
that is a social services,
operation
there.
Exactly.
So Chelmsford's doing its part. How do you have a handle on how many homeless people Chelmsford kind of deals with? I know it rises and falls seasonally, but are we talking about a couple of dozen? Are we talking about more?
Again, obviously there's dozens in the shelter. There are dozens out in the encampments as well. I don't want to over-exaggerate or overstate the impact. It's not as you walk through downtown Chelmsford or the Chelmsford Center, you're seeing homeless people on the sidewalk. You're not.
No, it's not visible at all, which is why where I was kind of leaning. There was one, I believe, a lady who used to sit right out in
Brenda. Her name was Brenda.
She would sit on a wall. She never bothered.
And she'd have the big shopping cart and all the bags. She's now actually at a shelter facility permanently. Why we have the encampments is they're on state property. So they're on the border of Route 3. So you say, well, why doesn't the town do something about it? Why isn't that state property? And trying to get the state to do something is very challenging.
So that's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
What do you do about it? Because they're not visible. I've always joked that you see all these panhandlers at every intersection in Lowell. There is no busier intersection on the planet than Chelmsford Center with those 5 different entrances. Yeah. You never see a panhandler. Yeah. How do you deal with it? How do you keep the panhandlers from going to these state, park encampments or whatever and coming into your town center?
But what we actually do is we communicate with them. In other words, the police know who they are. They deal with them. The Board of Health goes out and visits them, cares for them, and so forth. And so basically we tend to know, because many of these people, they want to live outside, whether it's a mental health issue and so forth. There's some people, unless it's an extreme cold situation, they won't go inside to a shelter. So they're migrant. They'll move around, and if they get moved from one place, they're going to show up somewhere else. And so it's just the nature of the population. So basically what we try to do is have effective communication, because oftentimes you're dealing with some mental health issues and so forth. But oftentimes these people aren't really causing a problem other than they're homeless, and obviously that's a challenge. But so I think the best thing that our police and fire and Board of Health and others provide to is establish a relationship with the people, communicate with them. If issues come up, deal with them. And again, obviously we deal with the shelter, at the former Best Western, it's the same thing. The police and fire and health have relationships with CTI and the security folks that are there. And you just manage it. Yeah.
The Best Western, is that do Chelmsford's homeless get some kind of preference there, or are they bringing them in from?
They're bringing it's all run by CTI under state, so we have no influence and no preference at that facility.
Right. You also don't seem to have to deal with some of the crime issues that you see. Tewksbury famously, their Motel 6, Home Depot, near highways. Right on the line of Lowell. It seems there's a lot of drug trafficking that goes on there. Well, Chelmsford's got a couple of highways, Route 3, 495. You've got shared town lines with Lowell. Yeah. Excuse me. We don't see a lot of those same crime issues that you see in a Tewksbury, for example. Right. How are you handling that, or is that just plain luck? Or
I mean, again, I don't. Our biggest crime issue is shoplifting. Believe it or not, the big, Walmart up in Drum Hill, the stores around there, that's the biggest crime, actually, is shoplifting. The police are just constantly responding. Kohl's and so forth. That's really where the big activity is. You're right, it tends not to be violent crime, but it tends to be, theft. I think it's probably the biggest challenge that we hear from folks. And, and that's just a constant thing, but again, driven by economic pressures.
All right, the big beautiful bill, or the big bad bill, whatever you want to call it, plus the state budget. How are you preparing to deal with what might come down the path? You've talked a little bit about it, but it seems that Governor Maura Healey and some of her policies are butting heads with President Trump and his policies. And that likely means that funding that would come into the state and then get passed down to communities like yours and all the others is going to be at risk. I think this Medicaid battle is going to be significant, and it will start to affect people on the streets. How do you prepare for that? Can you control anything in that regard?
I mean, we do the best we can. For example, we went to town meeting the end of April, beginning of May. We passed the budget because we had to. The fiscal year starts July 1. As far as we know, it's balanced. We have cash reserves. Basically, we're running about $170 million operating budget, and we have about $17 million in cash reserves. So we have basically 10%, which is a good, percentage to have. So we're prepared for it. Obviously, we've managed it. We've got a stable financial team. I've been there. This is my 19th year. My finance director's been there for 18 years. Our accountant's been there longer than the two of us in terms of employed by the town. So we're prepared. The challenge is what do you do when the time comes? For example, let's say we take $1 million hit, okay, in state aid, because let's say the $13 million in state aid goes down to $12 million. Well, if you just simply take $1 million of your cash reserves and plug it in, what do you do the next year? Because if the next year you're already $1 million behind, and then you got inflation and everything else, so now you're at $1.5 million, how do you dig out of that hole? And that's why it's not as simple as, well, just take your cash reserves and throw money at it. It'd be like living off of your savings account for your day-to-day living. You have that to meet the unforeseen. But the problem is if you live off beyond your means, basically, or on your cash reserves, you become a hole that's too heavy to dig out of. And that's the concern. So that's why we tend to, when we close the year and have a cash balance, we tend to put it to one-time expenses like road construction or some infrastructure like fixing a roof at the McCarthy School and so forth, because they're one-time, non-recurring expenses. But if you start funding your operating expenses like your police, your fire, and your schools, let's say you take $1 million hit from the state, and then you got to fund that $1 million, then the next year you've got to fund the increase plus that $1 million, and then that's when you get into what you call a downward spiral, and that's the concern. So basically the short answer is we don't know the magnitude of the problem. The other thing is with the schools, and this isn't just Chelmsford, when they start the year in September, you just can't reconfigure all the grades from K through 12 saying, oh, okay, we're gonna take these 6 teachers out. And so you just can't disrupt the kids that way. So you may have to do some, what I call a short-term plugging into the holes. But then as you're starting to do the next budget, you got to basically rebalance, because otherwise you're gonna go to a spiral. And what's going to happen is you're then going to lose your bond rating, you're going to lose your reserves, which means you're going to pay higher interest rates because you're a lower credit risk, and then you're going to be in a downward spiral. And then that's when are you going to recover, right? Think about it. If things ever do change, whether it's at the state level, the federal level, it's going to be more of a stabilization, not like a jump start to say, oh, okay, well, now you've taken this 4% budget increase. Well, we're going to fund you 6% to make up. They're never going to do that. And so that's why you've got to be readjusting in real time, because again, whatever this deficit that's coming, it's not going to be a one-year problem. And it's also isn't going to be this bounce back where they're going to say, hey, this is, here, we're going to make you whole and then some. It's never going to happen.
So you mentioned why you believe it's important to have the cash reserves at the number that it's at. Actually, first of all, you said 17 million in cash reserves and the budget is 172.
Yep.
All right, so those cash reserves are similar to kind of what we talk about here in Lowell. That's like a $600 million budget. So what do you say to people who say that's too much? You don't need that much in there. Is that the number that's recommended by the state and by these bond rating agencies?
Yes, exactly. That's what it is. And that way you would meet an unforeseen situation. And you had that during the pandemic where everything shut down. We were able to stabilize ourselves through that. That's why you have that. So if there is a major disruption or there's a major issue that happens, you can fund that. So if you had a major infrastructure collapse, whether it was a building issue or school, you can borrow some of it, but you're going to need cash So that's why you do it. I mean, you know, I don't think it's excessive. Again, it's part of the reason why we have a AAA rating is because the credit rating. In fact, our rating is greater than the federal government. You know, we're at AAA. The federal government's a slight downgrade from that. But that's the reason, and going to that issue, not to get off the Chelmsford thing, but that's the concern going forward. If you're running more federal deficits, at someday that bill's going to have to be paid. Unfortunately, be paid by our children and grandchildren. But how are you going to dig out of that?
Wait, so your bond rating, even though you have 17 million in cash reserves, is actually only slightly better than the federal government, which has a $1 trillion annual deficit and a $6 trillion debt.
Yeah, exactly.
I think these rating agencies are playing favorites
but they know the federal government can raise money.
And they can print it.
They can print it. We can't. We can't.
So this battle was played out a little bit in Lowell as well politically over the last couple of years. Well, you don't need all this money in free cash. You're supposed to use it for emergencies. It's an emergency. The rainy day fund, it's raining. Let's say that bond rating decreases even one level. What does that mean in higher interest and how much extra you'd pay on borrowing?
Let's say it affects you a quarter to a half a basis point or a percentage. Then if you're borrowing something like for a school $100 million over a 20 or 30 year period, then that's costing you more money every year. Now, same thing with Lowell. Gee, the high school went over. Why isn't a simple answer, just go to the city's reserves, pay the additional high school cost? That's not what they're talking about at this point, because again, is it sustainable? And then what does that end up doing to your interest costs? It's no different than why people today who own a house with a 2% mortgage won't go sell their house, buy another one, and now get to a 6% or 7% mortgage. The interest rates matter. Now, it isn't that dramatic is that kind of a funding gap, but losing your credit rating, increases your interest costs. It also, again, leaves you vulnerable to unforeseen, because you're right. If we hit a recession, I mean, we saw it. I lived it in 2009. I was there when the governor cut local aid in March of a fiscal year that was ending in June, and we had to fill that gap. And that could happen again. It certainly could, particularly if we hit a recession.
And those borrowing rates are important because you're talking about school building projects here and whatnot. How many different projects do you think are feasible, and can they be worked into the regular budget, or are you going to need to have overrides for each project as you did with that fire station? Yeah, we're going to need a debt exclusion ballot, Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion ballot questions to fund the school project. As I said, we've got $170 million operating budget. If we go, again, we've got 7 schools that are operating, all between 50 and 70 years old. We're proposing a new middle school, like I said, 4 through 6. If we borrow for that school, let's say that our cost is $150 million, okay? We're going to pay that off over a 30-year period, right? Well, how many of those can you do in a 30-year period? Because if that's the only school you do, then your other schools that are already 50 to 70 years old, they're going to be 30 years older. And so the question then becomes, you then got to look at what is the multiple plan. And that's why I think you're seeing these ballot questions and funding questions, because the town is facing that reality of it's not just one school that's going to be replaced. And if that school doesn't open until 2030, 2031, how soon can you go after it? Let's say you go 10 years from now. Let's say it's 2035, they've opened the next school project, whether it's the high school or, let's say the 4 elementary schools, you replace them with 2 mega elementary schools. What's that going to cost? Now you're layering that. You still got the 30-year debt where you still got 20 years left. Now you're going to add another 30-year debt on top of it, and that becomes a challenge. And then the other thing that people forget is, and you're going to see this in Lowell too, is it costs more to operate these newer facilities because they've got more sophisticated HVAC systems, computerized systems, maintenance, elevators, everything else. So it's not just, here's your debt service. Your cost of operations probably go up 6-7% as well, just because they're more sophisticated facilities. And so that's the real challenge. And so you're right. That's the question is, what can the town afford? Meanwhile, we also have sewer constraints because we're at our sewer capacity, and that could lead to increased sewer operating costs, because if the town right now doesn't have the sewer capacity, because we send all of our flow to the Lowell wastewater plant, which is owned by the city, but there's no ability by the city to expand that plant. It's on an island. There's no expansion capability. So what's that going to cost? And then you've also got water and other, and people have. What do people complain about this past winter? The cost of electricity and the cost of natural gas.
So now you're talking about water and sewer as well as taxes and everything else. So it's a real challenge going forward.
Concern about the push for new housing and how that might affect the town and put strain on the resources, the schools, the sewer, et cetera. And how are you are you preparing for that? Is this push for more housing and what some will call the death of single family zoning? Is that a concern?
Yes. We've adopted an accessory dwelling unit bylaw that meets the new state standards. So we're waiting to see what impact comes of that, because why wouldn't people do that? Given what you can get for rent on an accessory dwelling unit, even if it's of 900 square feet, and those costs, and then you've got the MBTA zoning requiring the higher density, that's going to result in more demand on services, whether it's sewer, water, and again, school services. Right now, we're opening up, the first phase just opened at the former West Campus on Princeton Street. That's 400 rental units. Some 3-bedroom, mostly 2s, 1s. There's going to be children that come out of there. And again, you can't deny a project because of children, but that's your biggest service. That's our big, over half of our budget goes to education services. And if you're already tight with space, that's just going to add more cost. And so that's the reality coming forward is, like you said, going back, is the model financially sustainable with the property tax? I think the answer is probably no.
So all that said, back in 2006, I believe it was, you were a finalist for the Lowell City Manager job.
Exactly.
It ultimately went to Bernie Lynch, the guy you replaced in Chelmsford. But looking back now, are you glad it turned out the way it did, or would you have enjoyed the challenge of Lowell? My hunch is you wouldn't still be Lowell Town Manager.
City manager.
Even gotten the 8 years that Bernie got.
I mean, Bernie's 10 years.
How it turned out?
Yeah, I'm glad how it's turned out. I've enjoyed my time in Chelmsford. It's great to be working in the Lowell area where I grew up, and I certainly live by the Chelmsford border. You're right. I don't think anybody would be last as manager in the city for 20 years. It's worked out well, I'm looking forward to the challenges that are confronting the community in the years ahead. So it's worked out well.
And politically, it's not to say that Chelmsford doesn't have its political battles. You've faced them. There have been efforts over the last handful of years to get rid of you. And there was a time where it looked like you were gone. And
exactly.
You've survived. How is the climate now? Is there a better relationship between you and the select board?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the longest tenured manager in the Greater Lowell area. I think Tommy's number 2 right at this point, which is amazing. So even though I've got my 19th year, but I mean, it is quite stable. I mean, obviously, Billerica now is going through their turmoil. Tewksbury has a new manager. Westford's relatively new. Drake's new. So I look around and getting younger.
Some of them are like literal kids. Like Matt Hansen and some of the others, right?
Yeah, and Colin Loisel and Tingsboro and so forth. So I'm 60, so I'm sort of the old person. Of course, when I came in, it was the Dennis Peendeck, the Dave Cressman, and so forth.
You were the young guy.
I was the young guy, and now it's flipped. But no, the relationship with the board is very positive. In fact, they're doing my performance review on the 21st of this month. There's no issues there. I've got a contract that runs out 2 more years. There's really no issues. And I think part of what I've tried to do, even through the toughest times, is know your job, know your role. And the job isn't mayor in Chelmsford, it's manager. And I've tried to stay out of the board's lane, and generally we've got a board that stays out of the manager's lane. What I mean by that is the manager's job is to run the town on a daily basis and not get involved with the policy decisions and the politics of the board. And corollary, the board's job is to do the policy and set vision and direction for the town and stay out of the administration of the town. I think when there were times when the issues clashed is when the board tended to veer into the manager role of the town. And you've seen that happen in the council and the city as well. And I think that's really where the friction lies. And right now there's no friction.
You've also been blessed to have, I think you've been blessed. You can comment on to have a little stability on the school side. Jay Lang.
Oh, yeah.
Another guy who left Lowell because he didn't get the job. I think he's gone on, 8 years now? 7 or 8 years?
Almost 10
Is
now.
it 10 now?
It's 10 now, yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And he's been great. He's been a great partner.
Like he can be there as long as
he wants. Yeah, I think Jay will stay there till he retires.
Well, Lowell, we always hear talk that Lowell's going to try to bring him back. But
I don't see that. And why would he? quite frankly, he earns more in Chelmsford than the Lowell superintendent. I'm going to say what it is, and why would he? Why would you give up what is a stable, positive relationship for the uncertainty and turmoil that superintendents go through in Lowell? So I don't see that happening. He's got a contract. He's in a good spot. He's very available and accepted in the community. He and I get along well. We have good communication, and same thing. We recognize each other's roles and responsibilities. In fact, I just voted with the the school committee to ratify our contract. So at 2 weeks ago, we have all of our contracts in place with our teachers, our paraprofessionals, food service, everything's in place. So we're not going to see what happened in Marblehead and Andover and these other places. We have contracts that now run out 3 years. And I have that with our police is done for all our police unions. The only group that right now we're still working with primarily is the firefighters. And we'll keep pushing that, maybe get it done this fall. And our public safety dispatchers is the only other group that's out. So it's a good environment.
You mentioned your teachers 3%. Is that 3% every year?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go the 4-3-3 route that Lowell did.
No, but they ended up doing it. It was interesting how they did this. And they look, again, you got to be competitive because it's not only the ability to attract employees, you got to retain employees. So what the school committee did, and I voted with them, is it was a 2.5% increase to the pay scale. But yet the top step where more than half of the teachers are, they got a 3.5%. So it kept us competitive because when we looked at comparables, our top salary was lagging. So it ended up being a 3%, but yet it was structured to the point where it was 2.5% plus the steps for the lower, and the top got 3.5% going forward for the 3 years. So it's very creative thinking, and it worked.
Is that standard? Not standard. Yeah. Is that what are the teachers getting? What police are getting?
Yeah,
what you're trying to get the fires? They're not kind of in a separate classification.
Right.
Like they seem to have been with Lowell recently.
Yeah. What happened with the police is this police reform thing. It became a stipend for certification. So and we saw this come out of the Massachusetts Joint Labor Relations Committee, which is the long-winded state agency that deals with arbitration cases for police. And they were awarding communities for post-certification as a result of the new police reform effort. And so the police did get more of that because that became the standard. And we knew if we didn't give that, that it would be awarded to them in arbitration. So we just cut to the chase. So the police ended up getting a little bit more because of that. But that's a unique situation to the police certification as a result of the reform effort.
So the state of the town of Chelmsford, it's looking good, but there are challenges ahead, and people shouldn't be surprised if that changes.
Yeah, you're sort of at the day that the hurricane's coming in, but it's still a clear day, but the storm's coming in. That's where we're at.
You pray the storm breaks up before it hits
exactly.
you, right?
Or you hope that you just get a glancing blow. That's basically what it is. The hurricane's coming because of the federal funding situation. You just don't know how big of a hit you're going to get.
All right. Paul Cohen, Chelmsford Town Manager. Great. Thank you for coming in. Long overdue. We should do this every couple of months, though, if that's okay with you.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to Town Manager Cohen. Thank you to you for tuning in as well. Hopefully now you have a little better understanding of what's going on inside the town of Chelmsford. And it's funny, but you hear some of the issues he says, and I keep trying to tell people this. It sounds a lot like what they're talking about in Lowell, and I can guarantee you it's what they're talking about in Drake, and it might even be worse in some of these communities because they don't get the federal and state funding that we get here in Lowell. But it's kind of a long way of saying, we're all in the same boat, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Tomorrow, former Lowell Mayor Bill Samaras will join us. We'll see what else we can get. We're trying to effort some of the front-runner city people to come on in here and join us as well, so we can kind of unravel a little bit about what this really does mean for Lowell and maybe even for some of the surrounding communities with potential spillover benefits. Thanks for tuning in. It's the Daily Pulse. I want everyone to stay cool out there. It's a scorcher on this Tuesday morning, and the afternoon's only going to get worse. We'll catch you tomorrow. Until then, everybody stay safe. See you on the other side.